My husband smiled at me across the boardroom table like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong meeting. It was a Tuesday in March. The windows of the 42nd floor looked out over downtown Calgary, grey sky pressing down on the Bow River. There were 7 people in that room. Our company lawyer, 2 accountants, my husband's older brother, my father-in-law, my husband, and me. My father-in-law had called the meeting. He said it was about the future of the business. He said he wanted everything settled before the end of the fiscal year. He had his reading glasses on and a stack of papers in front of him, and when he started talking, he didn't look at me once. I had built that company with my own hands, not metaphorically, literally. I had written the first client contracts at the kitchen table of our old apartment on 17th Avenue while my husband was out with his friends. I had driven to Lethbridge and Red Deer and Medicine Hat for meetings that he didn't want to make the trip for. I had stayed on the phone until midnight with vendors in different time zones because someone had to. And when the company started making real money, when we crossed $2 million in annual revenue for the first time, my father-in-law had taken my husband out for a steak dinner to celebrate. I wasn't invited to that dinner, he told me afterward. Casually, the way you mention you stopped for gas. That was 3 years before the boardroom meeting. A lot had happened in 3 years. I grew up in Mississauga. My parents both worked in healthcare, my mother as a registered nurse, and my father in hospital administration. We were not rich, but we were stable, and stable was a thing I understood the value of early. I was the kid who saved her birthday money. I was the kid who read the fine print. When I was 12, I asked my dad to explain what a mortgage was, and he sat down with me at the kitchen table and walked me through the whole thing, amortization and all. I studied business at McMaster. That's where I met my husband. He was in 2nd year, I was in 1st, and he had this energy about him that I mistook for ambition. He was loud in the right rooms. He knew how to make people feel like they were the only person he was talking to. His family had money. Not McMaster money, real money. The kind that had been in the family for 2 generations and lived quietly in holding companies and real estate portfolios across southern Alberta. We got married in 2017 in Banff. It was beautiful. I mean that. Whatever happened after, that day was real. We moved to Calgary and started the logistics consulting firm together in 2019. His family name opened doors. My work kept us in the rooms once we got through them. That was the arrangement, even if it was never said out loud. For the first 18 months, it was fine. We were building something and that felt like enough. Then the pandemic hit and things got difficult and my husband started spending more time in Vancouver, where his brother lived. He said he was networking. He said there were opportunities he had to be there for in person. I ran the Calgary side alone. I restructured 3 client contracts, negotiated our way through a deferred payment arrangement with our landlord, and got us a federal emergency business loan that kept payroll going through the worst of it. He came back in the fall of 2020 and things were never quite the same after that. I don't know what happened in Vancouver. I never asked, and he never told me. But something had shifted. He started treating the company differently, started treating me differently. There was a new confidence to him that wasn't about the work we were doing. It was about something else, something I hadn't been told yet. His brother started coming up to Calgary more often. They would have dinners with his father that I was not invited to. When I asked about it, my husband said it was just family stuff, nothing to do with the business. I believed him the first few times. By the 5th time, I stopped believing him and started paying attention. I am not a person who panics. I am a person who reads the room and then goes home and reads the documents. So that's what I did. Our shareholder agreement had been set up quickly in the early days. We each owned 40%. The remaining 20% had been distributed between 2 early investors, both friends of his father, neither of whom had ever shown the slightest interest in the operational side of the business. I had always found that arrangement slightly uncomfortable, but I had signed it because we were newly married and building something together, and I thought those facts made the paperwork beside the point. I started calling around in the spring of 2021. Quietly. I reached out to a lawyer in Edmonton who had no connection to my husband's family. I explained the situation. Not all of it, just enough. I asked her to help me understand my options. She asked me if I wanted to protect myself or reposition myself. I told her I wanted to own the thing I had built. Over the following 14 months, I did 3 things. The first was that I opened a separate professional account and began moving a portion of my salary, which was technically paid by the company, which I was technically helping run, into it. My husband had signing authority on our joint accounts. He did not have signing authority on this one. The second was that I reached out to both minority shareholders individually. One of them, a retired engineer named Bernard who had invested $30,000 in us back in 2019, mostly as a favor to his old colleague, told me over coffee at a Tim Hortons in Airdrie that he had been approached by my husband's brother about selling his shares. He seemed uncomfortable about it. He didn't like the feel of it, he said. He liked what the company had become, and he respected the work I'd done. I told him I would like to buy his shares if he was willing to sell. He said, let him think about it. He called me back 4 days later and said yes. The third thing took longer. The other minority shareholder was less straightforward. She lived in Toronto and had invested through a corporate vehicle of her own and wasn't particularly motivated by sentiment. It took 4 conversations over 3 months. But she sold too. By September of 2022, I owned 60% of the company my husband and I had started together. He still had 40. He didn't know I had 60. The transfers had been executed through my Edmonton lawyer, filed correctly with the corporate registry, entirely legal, entirely quiet. I want to be clear about something. I didn't do this to hurt him. I did it because I had spent 3 years building something real and I had watched the people around me start to treat it like an asset they could move around without my knowledge. I did it because Bernard told me he had been approached, and nobody had told me. I did it because 5 dinners I wasn't invited to is not a coincidence. I did it because I read the room. I also filed for divorce in October of 2022. My husband was served at our house on a Wednesday morning. He called me 12 times that day. I answered on the 4th call and told him I thought it was best if we talked through lawyers from that point forward. He was angry in the way that people are angry when they know they have done something but don't want to say what it was. His father called me 2 days later. He was more controlled than my husband, but I could hear the calculation in his voice. He said he hoped we could handle this maturely. He said the business had to be protected. He said he had always thought of me as family. I thanked him for calling and said I agreed that the business had to be protected. The divorce proceedings were not quick. In Alberta, they rarely are when there's a business involved. My husband hired a firm downtown. I kept my Edmonton lawyer and added a Calgary family law to my team. The process was civil on paper and not civil in practice. What I had not expected was the December meeting. His father called it 2 months into the proceedings. He sent a calendar invitation to my work email like nothing was unusual. Subject line, year-end planning, company direction. I confirmed. My lawyer told me to go and to say very little. I was the first one there. I sat on one side of the table and I poured myself a glass of water from the carafe in the middle and I waited. His brother came in next, then the 2 accountants, then the company lawyer, who had been hired originally through his father's network and whose loyalty I had never fully trusted, and then my husband, and then his father. His father sat at the head of the table. He had a folder in front of him. He opened it without looking at me. He said that in light of the current personal circumstances, he and his son had decided it was best to formalize the company's future leadership. He said that my husband would be taking on the role of sole managing director, effective immediately. He said he would be transferring his personal guarantee on the company's line of credit to my husband's name directly. He said this was in everyone's best interest. He used the phrase, everyone's best interest, twice. My husband was sitting across from me and he looked at me with something I can only describe as triumph, not happiness, triumph. There is a difference. Happiness is about what you have. Triumph is about what you have taken from someone else. I had said nothing yet. I had my water glass in front of me and I was very calm and I was waiting. The company lawyer slid a document across the table. It was a resolution signed by my husband in his capacity as a 40% shareholder, recommending the change in management structure. There was a space for my signature at the bottom. My husband's father looked at me then. He said he hoped I would see reason. I looked at the document. I looked at the signature line. I looked at my husband. Then I looked at his father. I said that I had some concerns about the resolution. His father said that he understood this was a difficult time and that he was sure we could work through the concerns together. I said that my primary concern was that the resolution required majority shareholder approval and that as the 60% majority shareholder, I had not approved it. The room went very quiet. My husband said, "What?" I said it again. I said that as of the previous September, I held 60% of the company's shares, having acquired the remaining minority positions from both original minority shareholders. I said the transfers had been properly filed and were a matter of corporate record. I said that I was happy for the company lawyer to verify this in real time if he wanted to pull up the registry. Nobody spoke for a moment. The company lawyer opened his laptop. My husband said my name. He said it the way people say a word when they think, if they say it firmly enough, it will stop being true. His brother said something under his breath that I didn't quite catch, but that I could tell was directed at my husband. His father took off his reading glasses and set them on the table. The company lawyer looked up from his laptop. He said that the share transfers were showing as filed and confirmed. He said the current share structure showed my name at 60%. He looked at my father-in-law when he said it, not at me. My father-in-law said, "When did this happen?" I said it had happened over the course of the previous year, through a series of private transactions. I said everything had been handled through proper legal channels. I said I had documentation if anyone wanted to review it. My husband pushed back his chair. He said I'd gone behind his back. He said this was exactly the kind of thing he'd been telling his family about. I said that I had purchased shares that were legally available for purchase from shareholders who had chosen to sell. I said I had not been aware that this required his approval. I said that, in fact, given that he had been in discussions with those same shareholders about purchasing their shares himself without informing me, I had simply moved a little faster. That landed the way it was meant to. His father looked at his son. His son looked at the table. I picked up the resolution document and slid it back across the table toward the company lawyer. I said that I would not be signing it and that any management structure changes would need to be approved by the majority shareholder, and that until the divorce proceedings were resolved, I would be consulting my legal team before signing anything relating to corporate governance. I thanked everyone for coming. I finished my water. I put my coat on and I left. I sat in my car in the parkade for about 10 minutes after that. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to say that clearly because I think people sometimes expect that moments like that are supposed to feel like movies, like there's music and a slow walk out of the building. They're not like that. I felt tired and a little sad and very certain that I had done the right thing. My lawyer called me before I got home. The company lawyer had apparently called her immediately after I left the room. She said things were going to get more complicated before they got simpler. I told her I knew. I told her I was prepared. The divorce took another 8 months to finalize. The business valuation became the central issue, as I knew it would. My husband's legal team argued that my share acquisitions had been made using marital funds and should therefore be factored into the equalization. My legal team argued that the acquisitions had been made from my personal professional earnings, paid into a separate account that predated the formal separation. It took 3 more sessions and 1 mediator before we arrived at a number both sides could accept. I kept the company. He kept the house on Pattison Hill and a cash settlement. His brother went back to Vancouver. His father did not call me again. I kept 3 of our original employees and hired 2 more by the following spring. We rebranded quietly, new name, same clients, same reputation. I moved the office to a smaller space in Inglewood, closer to where I was renting a 1-bedroom on the east side. The rent was lower and the light was good, and I kept a plant alive on the windowsill for the first time in my adult life, which felt like a reasonable sign that things were settling. I don't think often about the boardroom scene anymore. Sometimes people ask me about it, friends who heard parts of the story, and they want to know if I planned the whole thing, if I walked in there knowing exactly how it would go. The honest answer is that I planned the part I could plan and I stayed calm through the part I couldn't. And those two things together are usually enough. There was one moment I think about sometimes, when I said 60% out loud and the room went quiet. My husband looked at me like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize, and the thing is, he was. The person who had driven to Lethbridge alone and stayed on the phone until midnight and read every shareholder agreement and filed every piece of paperwork quietly and correctly. He had never really seen that person. He had looked at me and seen something easier. That is not my problem to solve. I still take the same route to the office I always did, up Macleod Trail and across the river. The city looks the same. I stop at the same coffee shop on 9th Avenue most mornings. The woman at the counter knows my order. I get in before anyone else and I sit at my desk and I open my laptop and I start working. Because that is what I have always done. And because now when I do it, the company is mine. I think about Bernard sometimes. A retired engineer who drove out to an Airdrie Tim Hortons on a grey Tuesday morning to meet a woman he barely knew because something hadn't felt right to him. He didn't have to do that. He could have sold his shares to whoever called first and gone home and not thought about it again. But he had a sense of what was fair, and that sense made him pick up the phone and call me back 4 days later and say yes. Small acts of integrity have a way of changing the entire shape of a story. What happened in that boardroom didn't happen because I was lucky or because I had found some clever loophole. It happened because for 3 years I had done the actual work, kept my word to clients, filed every document correctly, and paid attention when the people around me thought I wasn't. Those things accumulate. They build something underneath you that holds, even when everything on the surface starts to shift. I'm not going to pretend the process was clean or that I felt righteous through all of it. There were nights I second-guessed myself. There were moments when the easier thing would have been to let it go, to sign whatever was put in front of me and walk away and start something new somewhere else. And maybe for some people that would have been the right call. But I knew what I had built. I knew what the real numbers looked like and where the client relationships actually lived and whose name was on the emails at 11 o'clock at night. Knowing those things clearly, without distorting them in either direction, was what made it possible to act on them. What I have come to understand about the whole thing is that how you respond to being underestimated says more about your character than how you respond to being celebrated. My father-in-law expected me to be hurt enough to be confused. My husband expected that years of being overlooked at his family's dinner table had made me small. They were reading someone I used to be, before I understood that quiet persistence is not the same thing as acceptance. The 3 things that got me through it were not complicated. I tried to act with integrity even when nobody was watching, keeping the share purchases legal and properly filed, being honest with Bernard about what I was doing and why. I tried to think clearly under pressure, to understand the documents and the options and the timing before I moved. And I kept going on the days when going felt pointless, because I had learned early that the people who outlast difficult situations are rarely the loudest ones in the room. They're the ones who show up the next morning and open their laptops and get back to work. I still take Macleod Trail to the office most mornings. The city looks exactly the same as it always did, and I think that's the part that surprised me most. Not the boardroom, not the resolution document, not the silence when I said 60% out loud. It was how ordinary the morning after felt. The coffee was the same. The drive was the same. The work was the same. I had always had a company to run. I just finally owned it outright.